Glad to have you all here today for our webinar, Works in Action, Architects of Inclusion. I'm going to begin with a land acknowledgement, and I acknowledge the lands, sorry about that, I acknowledge that the lands that constitute present-day Mississauga, where I'm from, are part of the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat and the Wyandot Nations. Foundation believes that conversations like the one that we're going to have today are important to the relationship building that reconciliation requires. As I said, this webinar is being recorded and we're going to send it out as soon as possible to the emails that you registered with. I hope that you will share it as widely as you can. That would be really wonderful for us and for everybody, I'm sure, because this will be a wonderful conversation today. The chat is off and will remain off for the duration of the webinar. This is to make sure that folks who are using assistive technology like screen readers are able to access the webinar without interruption. So please don't use the chat or any of the reactions today during the webinar, and keep yourself on mute for the webinar as well. We do have our Q&A function on, and hopefully we will have some time at the end of the webinar to ask some of those questions that you may have to the panelists. So please be mindful and maintain kindness and respect in any of your questions and comments that you're going to put in there, because everybody will see those as well. Thank you for that. So again, welcome to our webinar. This is called Works in Action, Architects of Inclusion. Our Works in Action webinars feature a panel, and we're so glad to have our panel here today as we learn and speak about tangible ways that people are building inclusive spaces that celebrate Two-Spirit and LGBTQIA+ communities in all their diversity. As I said, my name is Jess Smith, and I'm stepping in for my colleague Lindsay Glennie today, and I'll be moderating the discussion. I'm very happy to be here with you all. And our panelists today, we have Cindy Casey from Kanata United Church, Jane Thirikwa, who is the Program Coordinator of Global Advocacy, 2S and LGBTQIA+ with the United Church of Canada, and Reverend Tim Kennedy from the Ecumenical Chaplaincy at the United Church, or at the University of Toronto. Thank you all for being here. We're going to get right into it. We're just going to start off with a brief introduction from each of the panelists. Let's start with Cindy. Introduce yourself and a bit of the project that you're going to speak on today.
Great, thank you. Thank you everybody for being here. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you happen to be located. So I'm Reverend Cindy Casey, and I have the privilege of serving out at Kanata United Church, which is in the western suburb of Ottawa. And basically speaking about the work that we have been doing as a result of becoming an affirming congregation. And when we became an affirming congregation, we wanted to have a project that was going to be very explicitly and intentionally welcoming to the 2SLGBTQIA+ community. And so we have been developing that. And of course, the United Church of Canada Foundation has been providing funds in different ways for different projects that we have been doing. This project in particular was really an opportunity for the participants to develop life skills that they would not necessarily be able to learn any other place in terms of it being a queer positive community. And there was nothing at all like it in the whole National Capital Region, which is a bit disconcerting, quite frankly, that we don't have those resources. And so this was based on them being involved in creating weekly meetings that were where they met to create a specific program, workshops, all that led to things like peer support, financial literacy, preparation for post-secondary, and also for advocacy, so that they had advocacy and ideas of what they could do, because the world is not a safe place for the queer community. We have pockets of safety, and Canada has a number of pockets of safety, but even throughout the whole country, the same isn't known everywhere. So we really felt that teaching them about their personal health advocacy, particularly as it comes to the trans community, and the legal rights that they hold within this country, and also to be aware of how to advocate for themselves should they go abroad. So that's the program. That was the initiative that came to us in 2024, and looking forward to the rest of our conversations.
Thanks, Cindy. Tim.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I guess it is afternoon now. And my name is Tim Kennedy. And as mentioned before, I'm with the Ecumenical Chaplaincy, which is the United Church chaplaincy presence at the University of Toronto, downtown campus, St. George. We have offices both at Emmanuel College as well as Knox College, and we work with a wide range of students, faculty, and staff. And we provide services related to all sorts of pastoral care and chaplaincy services to the broader community. But for the purpose of this conversation and this program that was funded by the United Church of Canada Foundation, our focus has been on creating safe spaces for students who have either um, a uh, a gender identity or whose sexuality is either identified as homosexual or bisexual, or queer identities or LGBTQ2S plus identities, and who also identify as people of faith. And what we've discovered is on our campus is that many of our students would say, hey, I'm a person of faith, and I'm a queer person, and I have a really hard time integrating those two together, finding places where I can be both fully queer and also fully a person of faith. And so many of our students would come to us and say things like, I have these great communities that are queer friendly, but if I bring up faith, it's, I'm sort of the fish out of water. There's not really a safe place for me to be both a person of faith and a queer person. And then likewise, for many of them, they would say that either their background, their upbringing, or even their present experience, it's difficult for them to be a person who identifies as queer in their faith communities. And I'm, mindful of one student who came to us and who was from China and became a Christian when they arrived in North America, actually in Canada. They became a person of faith. They grew up in a secular household. They became a person of faith, identified as Christian, and then very quickly had this crisis because they also identified as queer. And then they ended up in our office saying, I don't know how to reconcile these two. And so our focus for the funding that we've received and the programming that we're doing has been to create spaces for students such as this to come together with other students as well as faculty and staff and our chaplaincy team as well to create those types of spaces where those conversations and that type of real integration can take place for them.
Great. Thanks, Tim. And Jane.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you today, and I want to begin by expressing gratitude in everyone who has joined in this conversation. In my role at the United Church of Canada, I have the privilege of working alongside partners, faith leaders, advocates, and communities in Canada and around the world who are striving to build churches and societies where all people can live with dignity, safety, and belonging. And so my work really intersects, it's an intersection of faith, human rights, global partnerships, and community building. So on any given day, I might be supporting ecumenical dialogue with global church partners, helping develop resources for congregations, coordinating advocacy efforts, or even engaging with refugee sponsorship initiatives with our communities of faith, or even creating opportunities for Two-Spirit folks and LGBTQIA people to share their stories and leadership within faith communities. And I think one of the things that I appreciate most about this work is that, it constantly reminds me that inclusion is not really like an abstract concept. It's a very deeply personal. So behind every policy discussion, behind every theological debate, and every advocacy effort, there's real people who are seeking what all of us are seeking, and a place where they can belong and contribute and flourish. So I think that the United Church of Canada has a unique role to play in this work as it has been an advocate for many, many years. And through decades of this courageous leadership and our commitment to becoming a more inclusive church, we have developed these wonderful relationships and credibility that has allowed us to continue accompanying partners in very meaningful ways. And we like to say that we're not arriving with all of the answers. Rather, we seek to walk alongside others and listen and share what we have learned from our own journey. And I'm really glad to hear about the work with the young folks. Being this is Pride season. So every June 30th annually, we celebrate Queer Youth of Faith Day. I was working on this really wonderful project where we received these short video submissions from young people, talking about the intersection of their being young and being queer, and then being queer youth of faith. So I'm really glad to hear that, lots of this work is continuing elsewhere. So this is a bit of the work that I'm honored to be part of and why these conversations like these ones matter really. And I'm really glad to continue these conversations today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Cindy, you mentioned that yours is a unique program to the capital area. What inspired the creation of the program, and like what are the gaps that you were trying to address with the programming?
So this actually goes back to a previous center, which was actually out at Beaconsfield United Church. And I see Sean Friday's on the screen here, and he was the minister there at the time. And I had the privilege of doing program planning and development. And so a center was built there. And so I sort of, through that learning and through that development work, was able to see the pieces that we needed to be looking for. Right. And so when I came here and was serving in Kanata, once they became an affirming congregation, I knew the importance firsthand from the experience at Beaconsfield and with Sean, the importance of actually doing something concrete, not just putting a sign up on the window, not just saying we're an affirming congregation, pat ourselves on the back and say, aren't we wonderful, right? It had to be intentional. And so in doing that, I looked around to other organizations because I think we should support one another, whether inside the church or outside of the church in the wider community, and not duplicate things, but how could we support? And I was really dismayed to find out that in the National Capital Region, there was nothing. There was one small organization that was doing something at the time, but it was not exclusive space. And when we're talking about individuals who are coming to us who are significantly higher risk for suicide, significantly higher risk for depression, significantly higher risk for being unhoused, significantly higher risk for being mistreated in their households based on how they identify who they are and how they present. And so it's essential that exclusive space happen. Because they need to have a place where they can really say, this is home, I can feel comfortable here, I can leave my schoolwork here, I can leave a pamphlet here, and no one's going to come and say, oh, we found this horrible thing in this room that some people were using. That was where the importance was. And that has borne out in many, many ways, including to the extent that we've had two families who actually moved from the US to Canada because of the current climate in the US. And one little girl who is a trans little girl, they came over the border, and their very first thing they did before they went to their house was drop her off here to be able to be part of a program that is still ongoing, which is connected to Center 33, which is for children and younger children. So all that to say, when we got to this program, we were now dealing with people who were teens, who had largely been formed within a society that still was not 100% welcoming, knowing they had to watch where they traveled, knowing where transitioning could be really, really complicated, depending on where they lived or worked and prayed in the world. And so those were all the reasons that just heightened this absolute need for this to happen. And fortunately, with both government funding, which has changed significantly over the last couple of decades, sometimes we lost all sorts of funding got lost, and sometimes it got gained. So that's what motivated us. That's what motivated us. There were too many missing steps, and we were basically looking at youth where we had a chance to help prevent the homelessness, the alcohol, drug abuse, looking to avoid all of the dropping out of schools, those kinds of things that we don't talk enough about. We celebrate the things that are good, and that's great, but we don't talk enough about those pieces. So that's sort of
Wow.
a very touching point. That's just the
Mhm.
tip of why that was
Mhm.
so
I'm
important.
sure. I'm sure there's a story. Everybody that comes has a story that you could share about.
Yeah.
Tim, I saw you nodding along there. Can you talk about how you guys are supporting the students that feel caught between the parts of their identity, um, and how queer perspectives can help reshape how Christians overall are thinking about these kinds of issues? You're on mute, Tim.
Thank you. Sure. Thank you for that. Yeah. So I think that for us, it begins with a understanding sort of the theological conviction that God created the world and called it good. God created humanity in the divine image and called it very good. And the other program that has been sort of supported by the United Church of Canada and also United Church Foundation, and has also intersected to some degree with our work with the queer community, has been our eco-spirituality program. And I think that that care for creation and inclusion are deeply connected because both begin with the same theological conviction that God created and called it good. God created humanity and called it very good. And so then any system or theology or community practice that would diminish that God-given dignity should concern us as Christians. And queer people, I think, because of their lived experience of exclusion and marginalization often carry a profound sensitivity to what happens when the goodness of creation is denied or distorted. And that sensitivity that Carl Jung identified can help the church, I think, can help the church, I think more deeply, not only about sexuality, but also about many other ways that human dignity is compromised, whether it be racism or sexism or exclusion or other forms of prejudice that deny people their God-given worth and belovedness as created in the image of God. And so when we fail to see one another first and foremost as beloved image bearers, then something essential about creation is obscured. I think that that same sensitivity can also be extended then to creation itself. And so the question that had originally been proposed for this webinar was, how does queer identity inform our understanding of creation care? And so I think that that same sensitivity can also extend then to the way that we understand caring for creation and climate justice, for instance. And if the natural world is exploited, abused, or neglected, or treated merely as a resource for consumption, then the original goodness of God's creation is likewise diminished, just as it would be diminished in the life of a queer person. And so, from a queer perspective, especially one that's shaped by the existence of resisting dehumanization, from a queer perspective, then can offer a heightened awareness of what happens whenever something sacred is objectified, exploited, or denied its inherent worth. And so, in our chaplaincy setting here at the University of Toronto, creating inclusive spaces means helping people encounter the truth that they are beloved by God and that they are invited into authentic community and that they have a place at the table with the rest of creation. And to me, that's part of that is part of participating in God's ongoing work of healing, reconciliation, and the renewal of all of creation itself, which I think is our ultimate hope, the ultimate hope of our our Christian faith.
That's such a, that's such a practical way of thinking about it. It seems so obvious to that is, that you're thinking about it in the human dignity way, like we're all human type of thing, that everybody should be able to understand that and apply that. Um, I'm gonna ask Jane, how do the approaches to inclusion differ across the cultural context? You were mentioning the role of the United Church being really important in those conversations. Um, can you tell us about what you're learning from the differences and how the lessons that you're learning are being used um, in different ways?
Thank you. And thanks, Tim and Cindy, for your contributions. I was just thinking about that, the principles are the same all around the world. And as a United Church, what is our call as people of faith? What is our contribution to God's witness? And I think one of the greatest gifts of working globally is the realization or realizing how much, diversity exists within the global church. Sometimes in Canada, we can unintentionally assume that everyone is having the same conversation that we are having around the world, or that the reality is similar. But for communities around the world, they're navigating very different social, political, cultural, religious realities. In some countries, conversations, even just conversations about LGBTQ plus inclusion or focus on representation or leadership, these conversations are met with a lot of violence. So for a lot of people of faith, conversations begin with just the basics, basic safety, basic survival. There are places where people risk losing employment, housing, family connections, on even their freedom or their life simply because of their identity. So I also want to add that, at the same time, we must be careful not to just view community solely through the lens of the struggle. There's remarkable examples of resilience and creativity and leadership. And we see a lot of that, particularly with the global partners that we work with. I have met advocates and queer people of faith who are creating support networks with almost no resources at all. I have met clergy who are quietly accompanying LGBTQ plus people despite significant opposition. I have met young people who are leading transformative conversations within churches and, within ecumenical organizations. I can give a quick example of one of our partners that we work with from South Korea, called Q&A, where the co-founder was actually excommunicated by his denomination simply for blessing LGBT plus people at a queer pride festival. And then what follows is the conversations that come, from people seeking counseling, reports of really high rates of suicide amongst even allies in the church, and young people as well. I could speak about the Cosmopolitan Farming Community Church, for instance, that is in Kenya, that now has a congregation of maybe 1,000 queer folks from Nairobi who are finding these spaces of transformation in an environment that is very hostile, at the risk of even their lives. So I think one of the lessons that emerge from this is the importance of effective partnership that begins with recognizing that communities, they understand their own contexts best. And then our role is not to arrive with ready-made solutions from top down. It's more to listen, to learn, and to support their leadership. But underlying what remains constant is the human desire for belonging. So whether I'm speaking with people in Canada, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, I hear the same messages. I hear the same hopes. People want to know that they're loved. They want to contribute their gifts. They want to be part of a community where they can flourish. And I think for our global partners, literally, this situation is a situation for them, is a situation of life and death, not only for them, but also allies who are often also left behind. So I think that kind of becomes a common denominator, common humanity. It becomes really powerful as a foundation for dialogue and transformation, which is some of the critical work that we're doing at the United Church.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jane. I just want to remind everybody about the Q&A function. If you have any questions throughout, please add them in and we will get to them at the end. I just don't want anybody to forget that. So Cindy, Jane was just talking about, the at a larger level, at a higher level, how the church is involved in it. Can you take it down to more of a local level and what role the church community and the community in general, the local communities are have to play in 2026 in helping young people thrive?
Sure. Honestly, it's as simple as just simply being present. Being present to people, meet them where they are, right? Don't come in with a judgment. And as Jane said, this is not a top-down thing. I am not a queer person. I cannot identify with every struggle that a queer person has had, or all the other ways we intersect as just human beings. Wherever you're from, wherever your language is, with the color of your skin, the way you speak, the so-called accents that some people have that other people say they don't, they don't think they have an accent. We all have accents, right? So it is bringing it down to that. And so I think being authentic and being present. And if you are going through the affirm process as an example without something tangible to back that up, you are at risk of doing more harm than good. Because when you put that designation out there, what you are saying is, we are welcoming and you will be safe in this place. And when you aren't that, the hurt that you can do is exponential. So I think churches have to be really honest with themselves as they progress into this work. And then also understand that this isn't a one and done kind of situation. You need to have an affirm team that brings you through the process, but you also need to have an affirm committee that works beyond that, keeping it alive, looking at new ways, looking at new things that you can be responding to the questions that are being asked of you. So authentic welcome can be something as simple as there was this lovely, lovely woman, and with the same lovely women, by the way, and men as well, of course, are present here in Kanata, but we're present in Beaconsfield. There's one woman, and her name was Beryl, and she would bake cookies, and she would just silently drop them off to the youth. That says something to kids. That means something, right? Especially when it is an older person. So I would also recommend churches never underestimate what a simple gesture can mean and how important it is that it comes from somebody who they might think of more as their grandmother or perhaps even great-grandmother. How important it can be when the minister of the church is completely immersed in that work with them and listening. I mean, we all hear the thing, you have 2 ears, 1 mouth, right? We really need to use our ears and we really need to pay attention to what's in between the lines, because we can't say, well, we understand that there's a bit of a problem right now in the US and not reflect what's going on actually here and what has always been going on here. Right? We can't pretend that because we are an affirming congregation that there are not still people within the community who are not going to be as welcoming as they should. And they will cloak that in anything else. They ask clergy, are you a family man, to find out whether or not you're straight? And people will automatically assume that, you have a father and a mother. So when you see that represented, we have that represented here in our community, and you start to see that be different. And I think again, that being authentic, actually meaning what you say and say what you mean. And that transcends into everything, every other sort of demographic that we can refer to. You can't be changed in one area without being changed in another. So presence, authenticity, and doing the simple things.
Right. Tim, I'm going to ask you a similar question about that. If you could talk about the role of the chaplaincy, in the context of the biggest city in Canada and a huge university, and how you're supporting students as they're challenged by these different facets of their identity.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Um, you know, as you mentioned, the University of Toronto is one of the most multicultural, multi-faith, diverse communities within one of the most multicultural, multi-faith, diverse cities in the world. Maybe not the most, but it's one of the most. And so, we end up providing lots of one-on-one pastoral care. I think that can't be overstated because when students come to us struggling and wrestling with these different parts of their story, parts of their identity, and are seeking a way forward, they're seeking support, help, spiritual direction, guidance, um, and there's no program that can ultimately replace relationship. Relationships hopefully are a part of the programs that we do, but it begins with those relationships. And so we walk in one-on-one pastoral care with a lot of students, and our team spends lots of time with students in pastoral care. That said, as I mentioned before, we also run programs that hopefully help bring that student into community where they can receive support from and identity from the beloved community itself. And so we invite them into community through programs like Queering Religion and programs that offer students the opportunity to explore um, their queer identity and their Christian faith or their faith identity or spiritual identity. The other shift that we've made in recent years has been to recognize that we probably are at our best when we are inviting people into a community that embodies these values, where we're not merely simply talking about the fact that we are fully inclusive or that the church should be fully inclusive, but rather, and society should be fully inclusive, but rather to embody that in a vibrant community life. And so we have shifted some of our model away from traditional chaplaincy of one-on-one pastoral care, although, as I said, we do a lot of that still. And we've shifted beyond simply, programs that are targeting, those who are wrestling with reconciling queer identity and faith identity, and we're shifting to focusing on building of a vibrant, diverse, and inclusive Christian community on campus where students are growing in their knowledge and love of God and invited to explore what it might look like to become a deeply devoted disciple of Jesus Christ. And so, in that shift to building a vibrant, diverse, and inclusive Christian community, we feel that we're embodying those values that we talk a lot about and that we've attempted to help embody in some of our sort of queer specific programming. One of the stories that I love to tell and that I mentioned before was that student who had grown up in mainland China, who came to faith when they arrived in Canada, and their faith was so sincere. Um, the way that they had articulated is that they really love Jesus and they want a community of people. The way they would say it is they just want a community of brothers and sisters in Christ who can walk along with them, where they can ask questions about what it means to walk faithfully as a child of God, and as a gay person. And that was their heart. That's what they really were desiring and hoping and longing for. And they, shared that they would, go to some of the affirming churches where they knew that their queer identity would be affirmed, but they couldn't find anyone their age there. And then they would go to these churches that were packed with people their age, and they loved, the worship and the music, but their theology didn't create a space for them to really exist. And so we've shifted a bit, we've pivoted a bit, and our focus is now on building that type of vibrant, diverse, and inclusive Christian community made up of students from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of faith, all sorts of cultural backgrounds, linguistic backgrounds, different identities, who all come together and are attempting to be supportive of one another in their own faith journeys. And so this is not for us this is not minimizing the importance of of our students, personal identities, but rather it's an elevation of those identities into its proper status as a beloved child of God and as a part of the beloved community. And so that's sort of how we've made a bit of a shift, but our goal is the same to be in ministry to and with all of our students, and especially helping to cultivate that type of community for our queer students, that what they tell us, that's what they're really, really longing for, that place of
Mm.
belonging and that place where they can grow spiritually.
Good for you for recognizing the need for that pivot and doing that in a way that everybody seems to be responding to. That's awesome. Hmm. You said, Jane, that we should not arrive with the ready-made solutions. Can you speak about the assumptions that people in Canada or Canada, the United States, maybe bring to the conversations globally about queer inclusion?
Right. Oh, this I think requires a 3-hour lecture, but I think one of the assumptions is that, Canada represents the destination towards which all other countries are moving. And this is not to take away from the significant progress that has been made, and we are very grateful, to the pioneers who opened these doors to make the progress possible. I could speak to like examples of the decision by the United Church in '88 to be an inclusive church. And as you know, the history about the split and the division that came with that decision, or the apology from August of 2025 to 2S and LGBTQIA plus communities. So I think from the angle that the assumption that LGBTQ plus inclusion is primarily like a Western idea. Um, you will hear this a lot, primarily as a basis of misinformation that is peddled by fundamental Christian movements, the anti-rights, anti-gender movements that are laying a lot of ground in the global South, particularly. But in reality, as we know, many societies have, diverse understandings of gender and sexuality. Long before colonialism, we can learn a lot from indigenous people and indigenous nations in Canada, who have even put us to task even about language of naming folks. So I think, like in numerous regions, colonial legacies and systems, and imported theological frameworks have contributed significantly to a lot of the trauma and the violence and the stigmatization and criminalization that exists today. That is actually based and has roots in fundamental Christianity. So I think that this means conversations about inclusion are also conversations about decolonialization, about historical moments, about reclaiming memory and traditions that have so often been marginalized or erased. That, there are many ways to identify, and there are many ways of practicing your faith. Um, I think there's also a conversation even amongst our partners from around the world that, talk about the restrictive environments where there's an assumption that LGBTQ plus people are passive, like they're passive victims who are waiting to be rescued or helped. Um, and I think what I've encountered instead are extraordinary leaders, many who have continued to be great theologians and who are spreading radical and liberative theology in their countries and regions. Some who are pastors and ministers, scholars and advocates, all of whom are actively shaping their communities and creating these pathways and doors towards greater inclusion and transformation. But I think perhaps the most important lesson is that expertise exists everywhere. We may not have the same resources everywhere. And sometimes our role is not just to teach, but also to learn, from those diverse folks that we encounter. So I think that as we approach some of these conversations, we need to approach them with a curiosity rather than an assumption. And then in that way, we can be able to build stronger partnerships that are based on deeper understanding, that is beyond our context. And unfortunately, even for us, in Canada, we are seeing a little bit more flair and snippets of that backward pull, coming from the US, where our rights are slowly getting erased and being attacked. And for a long time, we only assume that that's an issue that's happening, far away someplace else, but it's also very close to home for us. So unfortunately, that has also formed a space for us to learn about the experiences of other people who have been fighting, with these kinds of discrimination and exclusion all their life. When we thought that, the groundwork for our rights has already been done and dusted, and we are good, but the reality, as we can see, is very different from that.
Mhm. Thanks. I just want to mention one more time the Q&A. If you have any questions for our panelists, please click on the little question mark box at the bottom and enter your question in there. And in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of condense a couple of the topics that we have scheduled to talk about so we can hopefully fit in some questions from you. Cindy, I'd like to ask you, what have you learned are some of the most meaningful ways that faith communities can support queer people beyond the statements of welcome? Like, what has going through the Affirm process taught you about how you can do that beyond saying you're welcome here?
Right. I think one of the biggest things to be doing is to actually welcome people regardless of whether or not they show up at church on a Sunday morning. Understand that our goal in welcoming is to be caring and authentic and to be a listening voice. So if someone is having a difficult time and they happen upon the church for whatever particular situation they're in at that moment, the goal is not what can we get from this person in return for our kindness, right? It's not a quid pro quo. And so if we can see our churches as something that happens 24/7, not just for an hour or an hour and a half on a Sunday morning, and that really, truly, genuinely welcome people into the community, even if you never see them on a church list, that to me is what we're supposed to be about, right? And again, that listening. It's not about growing our churches. It's not about saying, hey, listen, you know what we're going to become? We're going to become this. We're going to become an anti-racist church. We're going to become an affirming church. We're going to have women in the pulpit. We're going to build ramps. We're going to have great hearing devices, and everybody will come to our church. We should be doing all of those things because it is the right thing to do, and know that the messages that we give will go into the world in whatever way or capacity, And who knows where those seeds are being planted. It's really just about that. I know that doesn't make church treasurers very happy because they're all, that kind of thing. But I think it's doing that. The other thing is to continue to have strength in places like the United Church of Canada Foundation, where funding is possible. Because I can tell you, no matter how much funding we get from federal and provincial governments for this work, and we have gotten a lot, the fact that the church is funding it, which is so incongruent with how people were raised to believe what churches felt about the queer community, that makes a lot of difference in that. So that's the thing that can be happening. So support the United Church of Canada Foundation. Have those dollars go out in ways that can actually be tangible in places where this work would not be possible without funding. And without staffing, because the volunteers are fabulous. Love all the volunteers we have in the church, but you also need some people who can be dedicated to the work, right? And where their job has to be there. So I think the way churches can be supportive is to support these mechanisms that can be in place, and to think outside of the box, and to not worry about how many people are sitting in church on Sunday morning, but think about the work and all the people you touch in all the different ways of everything you do. And when you have a huge pride flag on the top of your building, as we do, and it's next to a school, and people drive by, that kind of plays with their preconceptions of what church is. And that's great. It shows other people that there's another interpretation. There's, inclusion is important, all of the things that both Tim and Jane have spoken to already. But it also says to that little kid who isn't sure, or that teenager who's driving by, I could go to that church. I might not want to go to a church, but I could go there and they say I'm still good. Right? And so that's what it is. There's no one recipe other than being authentic, which I keep saying, and not expecting anything in return, because it's really not a quid pro quo. It's just doing the right thing. And when you walk and talk the same way, so when you are being completely congruent, children catch that. Youth catch that. They know what that looks like. And so do the adults that are in their lives, and the queer adults that come who are trying to raise their families. So I don't know if that quite answers.
No, that's great. And obviously, I appreciate the shout out to support the foundation. That was great. I like that you included that as part of your answer, supporting the mechanisms that support this work. That's a great way to look at that question. Tim, what questions about faith and identity are emerging among queer students? What are you've been at the chaplaincy for a few years now. Can you talk about how it's the changes over the years? Are you seeing different needs now than you did 5 years ago?
Yeah, so I mean, I came to the chaplaincy just before the pandemic, and so I, jokingly tell people that, I am into around my sixth year, but in some ways, two of those years were sort of write off. We still were doing ministry, but it was all virtual, and you know how it's very difficult on a university campus. We could connect with the students we already were connected with, but the new students, it was virtually impossible to connect with them virtually, unfortunately. And so that greatly affected the way that we see ministry. And I think that coming out of the pandemic, we were wrestling with what does it mean to, re-enter into community and create spaces where students can re-enter into community after being sort of outside of physical collective, that physical community for several years. And so out of that grew this new vision that we had. from that partly from that experience and partly from listening to students and just this understanding that there was a growing sense of isolation among students. Sure, queer students in particular, some very specific and unique challenges, but students in general, all were feeling isolated, despite the fact that we're more connected today than we ever have been, right, with technology. And yet, our students, queer, straight, all across the board, our students were experiencing this sense of just isolation, not knowing how to reconnect, not knowing how to build community. And so that's why we pivoted. That's why we actually wrote a new strategic plan. And the central focus of our strategic plan was to build a vibrant, diverse, and inclusive Christian community through which students can grow in their knowledge and love of God, and then to put their lives to work in the world to participate in God's inbreaking realm in the world. And so that's exciting work, and it's not new, it's actually ancient. It's probably sort of the way that Christians have thought about our mission, our calling, what it means to be a people of good news, and to offer that good news and proclaim that good news. And so we have been trying to live into that through community. And I know that that may sound, not cutting edge enough. It sounds like you're sort of going back to sort of just original, Christian concepts. But we found that, focusing on the creation of those inclusive communities and then doing the hard work of engaging students and engaging others, and inviting them in, helping to answer their questions, helping them to work through trauma that they've experienced because of historic exclusion and prejudice, and then not stopping there, not only stopping, not just stopping at the therapeutic level or even at the, sort of pastoral care level, God still loves you level, but then taking it that step further and doing the hard work of helping to integrate them back into the beloved community, where they can be a part of the body of Christ on campus, a part of a spiritual community on campus. And that's been the direction that we have headed, and we've found that the students are really responsive to that. And they don't want to be a part of communities that only have a single, identity. They like this idea of being a part of a bigger community with a calling and a mission that's bigger than just themselves and bigger than just their own identity, but part of something that God is doing in the world. And so I'll just close with this by sharing one story of a student that identifies as trans and would say that they're non-binary, and they said something very similar to the student who had come to us from China. They said something very, very similar. They said, I don't want to be a part of a community where everybody thinks exactly the same. I want to be a part of a community where, there's a diversity of thought and where people challenge each other, but it's all held within the love of God and love for one another. And so I think that's what the Spirit is at work doing among us here at the University of Toronto. And it's easier said than done. It's multifaceted. It's extremely complicated. How do you do that on a very multicultural, multi-religious, diverse campus? But we're trying to live into that, and we're so grateful for our partners within the United Church of Canada and the United Church Foundation, and all of you that are part of this conversation, because I tell people all the time, we don't know what we're doing most of the time. We're simply trying to put one foot in front of the other and trusting that somehow that the Spirit of God is leading us and guiding us, and that God is at work in ways beyond that we can understand, to work all things together for our good and the good of our students.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's what that student said. That should be on a t-shirt. That's very profound. That's like a great motto. I think this is probably we're going to come to a close. So Jane, I'm going to ask you the last question here. You were talking about what you're learning and hearing across the world from the different leaders in different contexts, in different cultures. What can Canadian faith communities learn from the queer leaders and advocates in other parts of the world? Like, what do you think is the bottom line there, maybe?
Thanks, Jess. Um, I think that um, Canadian churches and our communities can learn from the courage and the creativity of global partners. And I think we are already seeing that, like Tim mentioned, like with students, they come from all over the world and they bring like different stories and different ways of doing things. I mean, we can take a page of learning from Gen Z, right now for folks who are my generation and younger or older. So I think that many leaders around the world, they continue their ministry and continuing their ministry and in their faith, despite facing these extreme challenges that some, Canadians cannot even imagine. Uh, but their work is not just defined by their hardships. It's also characterized by a hope, admirable hope, by their resilience and an unwavering commitment to their community. Um, Again, Cindy and Tim, they have mentioned the importance of relationship. I think that many successful initiatives begin not only, like large programs, but, with small circles of trust, where people feel safe and comfortable to share their stories. So be it in a student circle or an affirming committee at your church, I think those are spaces of transformation, no matter how small. I think the lesson is the interconnected nature of justice. Working from the recognition that many global partners do not just separate LGBTQ plus issues and rights from other concerns, such as poverty and migration, climate change, indigenous rights, disability justice, even public health. They understand that human dignity is connected, and in some ways, they're able to integrate broadly human rights work, within the broader intersectional justice initiatives. So I think that we have learned over the years that there's power in accompaniment. And sometimes the most transformative actions uh, is simply just showing up and consistently standing alongside people who are facing difficult circumstances. So that could be anything from a solidarity message or holding space or the rainbow flag in your church, whether that is a sign on to a petition to your member of parliament. And I think that we can also learn that hope is public witness. Our bodies are political, and we have the God-given privilege to be able to do that work. So we know that many leaders I meet, they continue to work, because they believe that change is possible even where sometimes evidence is limited or resources are limited. And I think that their perseverance reminds us that, transformation often happens slowly. Sometimes it goes forward and sometimes back. But, through these relationships that we have built over the years, these perspectives are, more deeply valued as a church that is seeking to build lasting change and not being afraid to be bold and daring, despite the consequences that come with standing on the right side of rights.
That's a great message to close on. I love that the messaging from all three of you has been kind of the same throughout of don't be afraid to try things. We don't know what we're doing, but we're trying it anyway. Be brave and try things, have hope. So thank you to all of you for sharing all of that. And I just want to mention again that this conversation and all of this work and future work is made possible through the stewardship of the trusts and endowments at the foundation and through mission and service. And so if you'd like to make a gift to one of the foundation funds or for mission and service, you can do so at unitedchurchfoundation.ca. And we'll gratefully receive those. And you can see in action from everything that you've heard today. That's a gift, money well spent. This is really important work, and we're very grateful to all three of you and all of your teams for the work that you're doing, and we wish you the best going forward. Again, this is being recorded, and we will send it out to everyone, and we hope that you do share it within your networks, and we'll see you at a future webinar, I hope, as well. And blessings on the rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you so much.